Max Verstappen fights back against FIA bias. Mercedes admits its current car is too inconsistent, and Lando says Max knows deep down that he was wrong. Do consider subscribing. Let's get into the latest F1 news. Max Verstappen says he has the wrong passport for the Formula One paddock amid fierce criticism over his driving tactics in last week's Mexico Grand Prix. In Mexico City, Verstappen was handed a double 10-second penalty for two incidents in which he forced McLaren title rival Lando Norris off the track, which caused unease from various colleagues over his aggressive driving style in the title run-in. Verstappen particularly copped heavy criticism from British pundits, with 1996 F1 world champion and Sky analyst Damon Hill wondering if the three-time champion is even capable of racing fairly. Meanwhile, Johnny Herbert, who was the FIA driver steward in Mexico, suggested Verstappen drove Norris off on purpose exiting Turn 7 to ensure Ferrari's Charles Leclerc would make it past, hindering Norris's title bid by reducing the number of points left on the table for the Briton. Verstappen initially shrugged off Hill's comments in the Brazilian Grand Prix FIA press conference, but speaking later on to Dutch-language journalists, he was amused by how he seemed to have the wrong nationality to be treated fairly by the media and the stewards. "I know what most people are like. It's nothing new," he said. Last year was perfect, so it must have hurt a lot for many people that they couldn't say anything negative. Now they've got the chance to say something, so they're all coming out of the woodwork. At the end of the day, I've got the wrong passport for this paddock. Verstappen called Herbert's theory a pretty extreme accusation and insisted he didn't drive Norris off on purpose in Turn 7. "I didn't do anything on purpose. They can't look inside my head," he said. "It's a pretty extreme accusation. We just raced hard." While questioning the size of the penalty for his Turn 4 incident with Norris, Verstappen did acknowledge the second 10-second penalty for his Turn 7 maneuver was fair, but he didn't feel there was any reason to race differently from now on. "You win some, you lose some," he said about the outcome of his Turn 7 lunge. "It depends. Every situation is different, and in hindsight, it's always easy to have another look at it. It happened, we just have to make sure we have a more competitive car, so we don't end up in that situation again, because that's where it starts." What is also behind Verstappen's suggestion of bias is his community service penalty for swearing in Baku's press conference, while Leclerc hasn't been slapped on the wrists yet for a similar offense in Mexico. Herbert had big opinions about what I said in the press conference in Baku, but I didn't hear him after the press conference in Mexico. Actually, what Leclerc said is worse than what I said in its context, and it was a much more important press conference with more people watching. But you know, I'm not going to spend time on that. It is what it is. Autosport understands the FIA is still considering whether or not Leclerc's swearing in Mexico's post-race press conference needs to be investigated further, with a call expected over the Brazilian GP weekend. George Russell believes the current Mercedes Formula One car is the most inconsistent the team has ever had, as it continues experiments on its upgrade package in Brazil. With Russell and Lewis Hamilton having both endured crashes with the latest version of the W15 since the United States Grand Prix, Mercedes is trying to get to the bottom of why there seems to be some quirkiness with its handling. Both Mercedes drivers are committed to running with the latest floor in Brazil, which features some minor revisions compared to what Hamilton had in Mexico as the team works on improving its stability. It is understood that there will also be minor differences between the versions that both drivers use in first practice to further help the team get a better understanding of what it needs. While Mercedes has had some good times with its car this season, winning 3 out of 4 races before the summer break, Russell said there remains a lot of confusion over the fact that it does not seem to offer a predictable platform. "I think in 2022, in the sort of porpoising era, without doubt that was far more unpleasant," said Russell, reflecting on Mercedes' progress during the recent ground effect era. But because of the nature of those cars, it was far harder to get close to the limit because you're literally jumping around every single corner, and you knew that it was going to bite you. "The problem we've got with this car at the moment is you think it's not going to bite you, and you can achieve a really great lap. And then suddenly nothing changes. Or you feel nothing changes, and the following lap you lose all of that performance. So, without a doubt, this is probably the most inconsistent our performance has been as a team in probably forever." Russell explained that the differences in floors, with the Briton getting his new version back on the car after it was repaired following his Austin qualifying crash, across the two cars was very small. "We're both going to be on the updated floor," he said. We've got a small difference in specification as a bit of a trial, but it's not an update as such. It's just in the realms of normal aerodynamical testing. One critical factor to Mercedes' hopes this weekend will be how much the new Interlagos track surface impacts the heat of the tires. The team's car is known to be very sensitive to track temperatures, and the hotter it gets, the worse its performance can be. With early predictions pointing to the newly resurfaced dark asphalt being hotter than it was before, Russell thinks it is an element that Mercedes needs to be mindful of. The color of the tarmac has an impact, so the darker the color, the hotter the temperature, he said. On the flip side, it's a very smooth surface, so the tires will be able to probably run hotter and be penalized less because it's so smooth. That's the theory. But we don't know if it's going to be good for us or bad for us. Austin was the best example. Friday qualifying, we're both fighting for pole. Saturday qualifying, Lewis is out in Q1, I end up in the wall and nothing has changed. Lando Norris has expressed his belief that Max Verstappen is aware on some level that he made mistakes during the Mexico Grand Prix. The young British driver feels that the three-time Formula One champion needs to reflect on his actions and consider how to improve in the future. In the race held in Mexico, Verstappen received two 10-second penalties due to incidents involving Norris during the 10th lap. The first penalty occurred when Verstappen forced Norris off the track at turn 4, which was a clear infringement of racing conduct. The second penalty came after Verstappen left the track at turn 7 and gained an advantage by overtaking Norris, which raised questions about his respect for racing rules and fairness on the track. After these events unfolded during the race, Norris took time to reiterate his respect for Verstappen's abilities as a driver. However, he also expressed disappointment in how the championship leader managed the situations that arose throughout the race. Norris pointed out that his main responsibility was to ensure that he finished ahead of Verstappen in order to prevent his rival from gaining more points in the championship standings. Norris mentioned that he has not yet had a conversation with Verstappen about the race and pointed out that it is not his role to push the Dutch driver to change his approach to racing. He stated their lack of communication was not an issue for him and that he felt there was nothing significant that he needed to discuss. Although Norris respects Verstappen as a person and acknowledges all that he has accomplished in the sport, he made it clear that he does not feel it is his job to mentor or guide him. He emphasized that Max understands what changes need to be made because, deep down, he knows when he has crossed the line. Norris further elaborated on Verstappen's capabilities, describing him as possibly one of the most talented drivers currently on the grid. He noted that Verstappen is well aware of his own limitations and the rules of racing. Thus, he understands what adjustments he needs to make going forward. On a personal note, Norris explained that he intends to maintain his current racing style when competing against Verstappen. He believes he has a knack for avoiding conflicts and keeping his car intact during tense moments in races. He acknowledged that there may have been instances where he could have been more aggressive, perhaps even paying the price for being too cautious in certain situations. Nevertheless, he remains confident that his strategy of driving cleanly has paid off, especially when it comes to accumulating points throughout the season. Norris shared that he considers staying out of trouble and ensuring his car remains undamaged as key components of his racing career. He believes that these seemingly small decisions can significantly contribute to a driver's success over a season, particularly in the context of the cost cap regulations in place this year. He has always held the belief that racing should be fair and clean. Reflecting on his recent performances, he mentioned he may have been overly nice, whether he was on the offensive or defending against others. However, he stands by the notion that he has consistently made wise decisions when it comes to racing. Norris emphasized that while he has sometimes faced consequences for not being aggressive enough, much of racing is about making split-second decisions to avoid crashes, which might not always be visible to fans watching on television. Additionally, he pointed out that the challenges drivers face during races often go unnoticed by those outside the sport. Norris made it clear that he approaches each race weekend with a fresh mindset, hoping for fair and clean racing experiences. He stressed that this is the standard that should be expected from all involved in Formula One. Liam Lawson has made it very clear that his attitude towards racing in Formula One is not going to change, and he firmly believes that the leadership at Red Bull will not ask him to adjust his approach. This belief comes after a challenging incident he had with Sergio Perez during the recent Mexico Grand Prix. In this race, which was only Lawson's second outing with the Red Bull team, he felt the need to apologize to Perez for a moment of frustration where he displayed an inappropriate gesture during their intense battle on the track in Mexico City. This moment occurred on lap 19, when Lawson and Perez found themselves in a tense situation at turn 4. After being pushed wide by Perez while he was trying to make an overtaking maneuver, Lawson kept his foot on the accelerator, leading to a collision between the two drivers at the next right turn. While Perez managed to maintain his position ahead of Lawson for the remainder of that lap, he eventually lost out as Lawson's Red Bull car made its way past him on the main straight. In a moment of frustration during the race, Lawson showed his displeasure by gesturing towards Perez as he made his overtaking move, a moment that did not go unnoticed as it was captured live on television. Although he has expressed his regret for the gesture, Lawson maintains that he will not change his aggressive driving style when faced with on-track battles. He stated firmly, "My attitude towards racing and how I approach races in Formula One won't change. That's how I'll always be." He acknowledged, however, that he does recognize the importance of learning from mistakes, saying, "If I make mistakes, I'll always learn from them, and clearly in Mexico I made a mistake, and I'll learn from it." After the race, Lawson shared that he briefly spoke with Perez, but they both left the track quite quickly after the event. He described their fight during the race as a typical racing incident, noting that it was an intense and competitive moment that occurred naturally during the course of the race. "I apologize obviously for what I did after the incident," he added, reflecting on his actions. Lawson further emphasized that while he aims to avoid making enemies, his primary focus is on racing to win rather than making friends in the paddock. Following the incident, Red Bull's Motorsport advisor Helmut Marko commented that the collision between Lawson and Perez was unnecessary and suggested that Lawson was somewhat to blame for the incident. Despite this critique, Lawson may still find himself in a position with the senior Red Bull team next season if they decide to part ways with Perez due to his underwhelming performance. There are potential opportunities ahead for Lawson, especially since his current teammate Yuki Tsunoda is heading into his first drive with Red Bull at the upcoming Abu Dhabi test. Christian Horner, the team principal of Red Bull, has also hinted at a possible interest in Franco Colapinto, who has shown significant promise while driving for Williams, although he does not currently have a race seat lined up for 2025. When asked if he had any discussions with Marko and Horner since the altercation with Perez, Lawson responded, "I don't think they want me to race differently, but obviously the target is not to make contact with another Red Bull car." He continued by stating that it was never his intention to make contact during the race, and upon reflection, he acknowledged that he could have taken a different approach to avoid the incident entirely, expressing that in hindsight, that would have indeed been the better choice. Lewis Hamilton may not be in the title fight during the 2024 Formula One season, but after years of dominance, the Mercedes driver is still one of the first ports of call when media have questions about driver behavior. That's what has made Hamilton such a popular figure when it comes time to ask about hard racing between title contenders Lando Norris and Max Verstappen. But as far as the Mercedes driver is concerned, his opinions haven't changed since Abu Dhabi 2021. All you need to do to understand him is to listen to some of my radio comments from the contentious title fight. Aggressive driving between Formula One's 2024 title contenders has become the prime talking point during these last few rounds of the championship, with both Lando Norris and Max Verstappen taking penalties that have been perceived as both fair and controversial, depending on the opinions of the person weighing in. That subject rose again during the press conference for the Brazilian Grand Prix, with media asking Lewis Hamilton to comment on the fierce fight between Norris and Verstappen. "I think it's really exciting for the sport, firstly," he said of the tight battle. "The last couple years, not necessarily so exciting with Max just leading the way. That sometimes happens. It's been really exciting for the fans to see that it can go right down to the wire at the end of the year. There's still a possibility of Lando catching up. I read somewhere, I think he's got to get 11 points more or something in each of these next races, which is definitely possible with the performance they have." He also had plenty of kind words to offer about both drivers. "I mean, we all know Max and his strengths and can't really say too many weaknesses, if any," Hamilton said. "And you've got Lando, who's really risen to the occasion and has been really leading the team." However, the Briton initially declined to comment on the way the two men have been racing each other, with Norris's controversial 5-second penalty in Austin, followed by Verstappen's controversial penalties totaling 20 seconds in Mexico. "I haven't really spent too much time looking at how they're racing and how they're positioning their cars," Hamilton admitted. Obviously, everyone knows of what happened in the last two races. Everyone will have an opinion on it. But at the end of the day, those two drivers know what they're doing. I'm excited to see what happens over these next races, and I'm just hoping that I can at least have a good seat view to watch it all, as they'll be ahead. Hamilton's reticence in commenting stems from the fact that he feels Mercedes is in no man's land in terms of performance, where the team isn't being seriously challenged from behind, but where it isn't able to fight hard with the folks out front. But the Briton made a critical callback to the controversial 2021 Abu Dhabi season finale in his response to a question during the FIA drivers' press conference, saying, "The rules are still the same as they were back in 2021, so what we saw in 2021 with myself and Max is still happening today and will continue until perhaps they make a change." He added, "Also, the tracks with all the runoff areas don't help. It was gravel or grass, they wouldn't be doing that all the way out there. So it'll be interesting to see the development. Hopefully they'll make some changes for next year." When pressed for more details about his perspective on the Norris versus Verstappen fight and how that fight has been treated by the stewards, Hamilton instead pointed again to 2021. "All you have to do is just go look back and listen to some of my radio comments back in the day," he said. Abu Dhabi 2021 was controversial in that race. Director Michael Massey opted to break with convention in staging a last lap restart, where only a portion of the lapped cars were allowed to rejoin the lead lap. The only cars allowed to move out of the way were the cars separating then-leader Lewis Hamilton from Max Verstappen. Even before that, however, the race was contentious, with Hamilton asserting that Verstappen pushed him off the track on lap 1, while Verstappen arguing that Hamilton needed to return a position he gained unfairly. After the race was brought to a halt under a safety car due to Nicholas Latifi's lap 53 crash, Hamilton regularly called in to his engineer Peter Bonington to raise concerns about the stewarding, ultimately admitting that this is getting manipulated and that he was speechless at the decisions. Those radio messages, though, are all Hamilton would point to in Brazil in 2024, saying, "It's not really something I really want to tap into as it's nothing to do with me at the moment. Obviously, if I was in the battle, I could lean more into it. But these are things you have to ask those two because they're the ones that it's affecting." But I don't think you're seeing much difference across the years from 2021 until now. It's pretty much the same. That is it for this video. I'll see you around.